This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com.
Welcome to this short introduction for ACCA F8 Audit and Assurance. First, the syllabus, and this divides into 5 sections. Section A, Audit Framework and Regulation. The most important element in here is to do with ethics. It is vital that auditors adhere to an ethical framework. If you can't believe what auditors say in their audit report, then to all intents and purposes the audit has been pointless. If auditors are subject to undue pressure and they cave in to undue pressure, if they say that financial statements show a true and fair view when in fact they don't, then they've wasted their time. Ethics in many ways are the ultimate selling propositions of professions. When you become a member of ACCA, if you contravene one of their ethical principles, then you can be disciplined, you can be fined, indeed you can be expelled from ACCA. This in many ways is what distinguishes a professional body like ACCA from people who go for business degrees like MBAs. Once you have your MBA, you tend to keep it. If you're ACCA or indeed an ACCA student, you have to continually comply with the ethical standards. Planning and risk assessment. And risk assessment starts even before you say yes to a new client. You need to do your homework. You need to find out, well, what are these people like? Are they directors, the owners? Do they have murky backgrounds? When I look at the business, does it look like a business which it's quite hard to explain the profits it's making from its activities, in which case you might conclude that maybe there's a risk of money laundering, and you might want to simply stay away and say no to clients because the risk you perceive is too great and could lead to reputational damage. Once you say yes to the client, then you want to look at the client's financial statements, draft financial statements, and you want to try to identify where the riskiest areas are, because by and large that's where you have to do most work. So if you had a company with a lot of very high value inventory, but very portable inventory, like say a jewelry shop, then you know inventory is at risk of being misstated, whether by error or by theft or fraud. And you need to spend a lot of time getting the inventory sorted. If, however, the company is one where there's a lot of cash transactions, then you know cash is going to be an area that you need to plan to do a lot of work. Planning also covers the more mundane stuff like how many people do I need, what dates are we going to go there, do I need to attend a stock take, and so on. Auditors rely immensely on internal control. This is the system where really within the client you want one person really checking up on another. So ideally one person might start a transaction, another one authorizes it, and another one actually carries out the transaction. So there are 3 people involved, 3 minds involved. This reduces the chance of error, and obviously if there's going to be fraud, these 3 people have to collude, have to cooperate in some way, which exposes us to some danger. Auditors, and you and longer questions, may have to look at a system of internal control and look for where there may be weaknesses, where there may be problems with that system of internal control, and you may have to recommend changes that will tighten the system up. Audit evidence. In many ways, the whole process of auditing can be distilled down to say it's seeking evidence. It's seeking evidence about the figures appearing on the financial statements to verify or to hope or to seek evidence, sufficient appropriate evidence that these figures are true and fair. So if you have non-current assets, if you have motor vehicles, how do you know the motor vehicle, okay, there's one sitting in the car park, how do you know that motor vehicle is actually owned by the company? How do you know it's not rented? How do you know we've included all the motor vehicles? How do you know that the motor vehicle has been properly valued? In other words, that the depreciation rate has been properly applied and so on. So by and large, every figure on the financial statements making a number of what's called assertions that they're accurately valued, that the transaction has occurred, that maybe the asset has been owned, that it's complete and so on. And for every assertion that the figure is making, we need to collect evidence. And the way we do it is by inspecting documents, inspecting assets, inquiry of people, asking for letters of confirmation. We can recalculate certain amounts and so on. There are about 5 different ways of collecting evidence. And finally, almost the whole objective of the audit is able to report on the financial statements. Do they show a true and fair view? We can't be certain of it. We're always dealing with reasonable certainty that there's no material misstatement. But the members of the company, the shareholders who've appointed the auditors, want to know that the financial statements are essentially telling the truth. If all is well, then the audit report will be what's called an unmodified audit report. It will simply say the financial statements show a true and fair view. But if the auditors are concerned about a figure, they will say this, they will state this in their audit report. It becomes what's called a modified audit report. And in extreme situations, they might conclude that the financial statements do not show a true and fair view, and essentially they're not worth the paper they're written on. Next, we can look at what's in the syllabus, what's the format of the exam is here. And there are now 2 parts. Part A consists of what are called 3 case questions. Each case question presents you with a couple of paragraphs of information, and from that 5 objective test questions emerge, kind of relating back to what you've been told in the case. Now, although the 5 questions all emerge from that information, essentially the 5 questions are independent. You could get questions 1 and 2 wrong, but you could get 3 and 4 correct. And because of that, although they relate to the same body of information, they in a way end up being essentially 5 relatively independent multiple choice questions. We still have in our material lots of the old-fashioned standalone multiple choice questions. These are still well worth doing. They give you good revision, good practice in approaching multiple choice questions. If you're doing the exam on paper, these objective test questions will be multiple choice, which of A, B, C or D is correct. If you're doing a computer-based exam, the objective test questions are more varied. You could be asked to choose, which 2 out of the 4 options, or which 2 out of the 6 options you would think are correct, or maybe you have to match up items on the screen and so on. Part B are essentially old-fashioned written questions. In the computer-based exam, you type these into a kind of word processing screen and so on there, but it's essentially an essay-type answer. The main thing about these questions is this is where the ACCA explores your application of knowledge to the scenario. By and large, what they don't want here is for you to simply come out with a very standard list of reactions. They've written a scenario, maybe a page worth of information, maybe describing an accounting system, and then they want you to identify what the weaknesses are in the internal control in that system, and perhaps to recommend answers. The main fault of students when answering these is that they do not relate their answer to the facts that they were presented with in the scenario. They come out with a very standard question rather than one tailored to the question that's actually being asked. Finally, a brief rundown of our resources here on Open Tuition. There are lectures and there are lecture notes. These have the same kind of chapter numbers and corresponding lecture numbers. You can download the lecture notes, but you cannot download the lectures. Nearer the exam, there are some revision lectures you might want to look at. These, for example, show you how to approach some old exam questions and so on, how to get the most out of them, really see where the marks are going to be earned. At the end of each chapter, in the notes of the lectures, we have a number of multiple choice questions to give you kind of immediate practice on those chapters. We have revision questions as well, which will include some case questions. And then we have our forums. You can go to the general F8 forum where you can ask other students, or you can go to the Ask the Tutor forum where we try to get back to you within about 24 hours, answering any query you might have.